Dairies are collecting more and more data every single day, but the real challenge lies in putting it to work to make management decisions easier, empower employees, and make real progress to solve problems, hit goals, and move your dairy farm forward. In this episode, Amber Horn-Leiterman of Hornstead Dairy in Brillion, Wisconsin, shares the game-changing technology that was critical in solving a repro problem and has now become a mainstay in their dairy herd management. Find out how this data collecting Bolus and its dashboard are empowering the team to make daily decisions that contribute to a healthier herd and a bright future for Hornstead Dairy Farm. All this and more today on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. This episode is brought to you by smaXtec. smaXtec is a health management system for dairy cows. The unique Bolus Technology measures internal body temperature, water intake and drinking cycles, and rumination and activity. For more on smaXtec, check out the links in our show notes. Here we are, Amber Horn-Leiterman at Hornstead Dairy. This is your family farm.
It is. So this was actually on my father's side. Hornstead Dairy was created back in 1863. It was actually originally a homestead. It was homesteaded, I believe Abraham Lincoln is on the abstract. If you go back, yeah, it's an actual homestead that they gave 40 acres to people who wanted to go out into the upper Midwest. And our family came over from Germany, the Prussia area, and that's how Hornstead Dairy was created. And myself, I'm the 6th generation. We'll see once how it works for the 7th generation. So they work here now. So we have 5th generation, 6th generation, 7th generation working here today. That would be my 4 kids. So here we have about 3,900 animals total. We're milking about 2,200 animals.
Was this always the plan that you wanted to come back to the family farm?
No, it was not always the plan. So obviously I'm going to date myself here. So I graduated high school in 2001 and I went to UW River Falls, and my degree is in ag finance and minors in Spanish and economics. And I was going to work in banking. Didn't turn out that way, obviously. I also, once I was doing my education career, or so to speak, I was going to go to law school. Drake specifically in Iowa, LSATs and all that sort of things. And once I got done going through UW River Falls and getting my degree, I was done with school. It was time for the next venture. So I actually started my professional career at a custom calf grower with Jim and Lori Cleveland with Quiet Crest Custom Calf Raising. And I was there as an intern 1 year, and then I went full time after college, and then got married, was pregnant with my first child, and decided it was time. There was a spot open on the farm, and my dad and mom were like, "Hey, we got a spot, and if you'd like to come in," and I said, "Sure." So since then, I'm still farming with my mom and dad. Hornstead Dairy is a partnership between my brother Tom and my mom and dad and myself. And yeah, that's where we sit today. So,
so finance major.
Yep.
Spanish.
Yep.
And then also you were on a path to go to law school.
Yep. So I was going to go to law school. Yeah.
Yeah. So are you glad you pursued Spanish given where you're at today?
Yes. Spanish was a great path. I really liked foreign language, so there wasn't a hard path. It really interested me when I was younger, and I love a foreign language. I'd love to learn Chinese or Russian. I have no idea, but random fact. I'd love to learn the next language. And then, one thing going back in school, I would love to learn more about HR because, again, when I started, I think we were milking 250 cows.
Wow.
So I have a lot more employees, a lot more business decisions to make on that realm of things. So yeah, I could, looking back at, instead of law school, things like that, I should have been, or instead of business law and torts, I should have probably been concentrating on HR courses. But you learn as you go, and what you need to focus on as you go.
Because as you said, the dairy has grown.
Very much so.
The number of people here has grown alongside that.
Mm-hmm.
And more cows, more people equals more challenges. Right?
Very much so.
And I think that's something a lot of dairy owners and managers can relate to is as you grow and scale, sometimes you're growing and scaling so fast, you don't even realize where you're at, right?
Someone once told me, because in 2017, we made the big decision, actually before 2017, we made the decision that we needed a new parlor and we needed to scale the parlor to what our cow numbers were and things like that. So we undertook a big, my parents were like, hey, are you guys interested in continuing this? And I was like, oh yeah, my brother and I were. So we're like, okay, we're going to do a construction project. We built a new parlor. We built some freestall facilities, and we, at that time in 2017, we implemented as many, major changes as we could as we built along. As we did that transition from a double 10 herringbone parlor to a double 25 parallel parlor, someone once told me it was like drinking out of a fire hose. And so I use that analogy quite often. Size and scale is, it's not a smooth transition. It's a lot of things get thrown at you at once and you're constantly learning every day. And so that's one thing. You never know what the next day brings some days. So that's one thing, the management, you go from, we went from, I think we had 10 employees now between part-time and full-time, including, my kids. We can have up to 30 to 34 people here.
Wow.
During a day. We're operation our slides, we're running 24/7. So, if there's animals, there's animal care, there's always something to be looked at and done on the farm.
And sometimes just when you think you've got it all figured out, right? You've invested in the facilities, you've got the crew, you've got a good herd of cows, you've got the protocols, but then something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Right? You have a challenge that you just can't figure out. And this is a spot you were in just a few years ago.
So I want to say, so 2021, 2022. We're just plugging along. We're doing well. Cows are milking great herd health. And for some reason, our cows, they're milking great, but they weren't getting pregnant. And we were very much a system or a farm that utilized double off sync. So we always had spectacular preg rates. We always had spectacular conception. And the end of 2021, it was like something, a switch had flipped. And we were having a really hard time. And, you do what anybody does. You consult. So you bring in your nutritionist, you bring in your vet. We did utilize the UW-Madison veterinary students to come in and just kind of just see if they could get to the root of the problem. There was a lot of getting up at 2:00 in the morning and taking blood samples to check progesterone levels for your timed AI. We were doing all that and it was still we weren't making progress and we weren't getting cows pregnant. And that's kind of, I don't want to say the kiss of death, but that's a big struggle. That's what you need to have happen in order to be a progressive and dairy farm is have those genetics and have those pregnancies and have that lactation. And so what we ended up doing is it was a simple feed test. And looking back, you just want to kick yourself because you send in a feed test for mycotoxins and that was on our list, but it was very much make sure employees are following protocols, make sure breeding times are right on, make sure everyone's getting fed properly at the right time, feed is getting pushed up, make sure we're giving AI, artificial insemination shots on time. Lining up all those things and following people and double checking that they're doing their job. Come to find out, it was very much a mycotoxin issue that we were struggling with, but it had taken us 9 months to find that.
9 frustrating
months where you're losing ground. So after that, and once we got the results back, we knew we had to make some headway because we had experienced a definite decrease in our pregnancy rate at the farm. And it was starting to affect all the things like how many times does a cow need to get bred before she is pregnant? How late in her lactation are we still breeding her? Even though she's 300 days in milk, are we still going to breed her? She's 350 days in milk. Are we still going to breed her? The milk was there. We never lost milk, but our days open we were getting up to the 200s. And that's huge. It was also the labor, going out and finding these shots. Looking back, it's like, now that's the first thing we do is we test for feed. We test for mycotoxins in feed. So what we had, the mycotoxin that we had was zearalenone. And zearalenone is an estrogen mimicking mycotoxin. So it made complete sense that when we were running these blood tests saying that these cows were all in sync, ready to be bred, but we couldn't get them settled, it made a lot of sense why we couldn't get them settled, because breedings were very sporadic. There was no syncing. We call it a sync and off sync program, but there was no syncing involved. And that came back from the mycotoxin. So working with nutritionists, working with our veterinarian, working with UW Madison vet students, we are tapping every expert we can to get to the bottom of this. And once we did, we made some changes with our feed with some binders and things like that to go forward. While this was going on, it's kind of funny how, well, it's actually very funny. I talk about it all the time is I get a cold call. I get a salesperson that just shows up at the farm, which is hilarious because sometimes you're like, what are you doing here? Do you have an appointment? Because, it was a day in June. They're like, hey, were you interested in an activity monitoring saw? Any activity, like, can I interest you in sitting down and having a conversation? And I was just kind of like, that's interesting. We were doing first crop at the time, so I was the only one on the farm. Okay. Making sure everything is getting done. Everyone else is out in the field. And I'm like, how about you come back and we'll have a meeting about it. I'm interested. Send me, the brochures and the stuff online. And that was the beginning of smaXtec coming to here, Hornstead Dairy.
So here you were diagnosing this root problem that was leading to what you were seeing as a repro problem. And you're able to use your resources in the diagnostics to really get down to the what of the problem. But then there's this whole next layer of, okay, so you figure out what the problem is. And now as you try to implement ways to fix it,
how?
Yeah, how? And how are the interventions and treatments that you're working on and implementing it, how are they actually working for getting you back to where you wanted to be? And as you said, at that time, then you literally had someone show up on your doorstep here.
Anyone on the farm knows that it's like, if depending upon what goes on that day or how things shake that day, like whether or not you're open to talking to people or if you're hiding in the bathroom and hoping they, don't see you when you go. Probably cut that out.
Oh no, let's just be real.
I was open to anything at that time. And, we had found the root of the problem. We were changing our feed, but still we had ground to make up. I had a lot of cows that we could not get pregnant and that, it was going to take me a long time. And so I had just started researching activity monitoring softwares, and we set up a meeting. So she handed me some literature and she handed me a bolus, and she was like, this bolus tracks temperature and rumination. And I was like, are you sure? Because if you literally feel it, that's where, like, I give a lot of tours, and one of the very first things that when they ask me about cows, I'm like, well, this bolus tells me everything I need to know. I still have to look at the cow, but it tells me everything I need to know. And I hand it to them, and they put it in their hand. I'm like, that's it? I was like, yep, that's it.
What else is it actually monitoring inside that cow?
Specifically our temperature, our rumination, water intake. Really, it's keeping track of if she's drinking enough water during the day. It also tracks her activity. So activity is very much tied into those breeding alerts when she needs to be inseminated or when she's ready to be inseminated, those heat alerts that our breeders use. Activity also helps in the realm of calving alerts. So it keeps everyone on task as how many calves might be coming in during a day. And then the latest version that I have is the pH monitoring. It's giving us an idea of what's going on in that pre-fresh group and post-fresh. For the first, I believe it's 150 days, it's monitoring the pHs. So we did the trial run. We put in 100 boluses of breeding age cows that I was having, problems breeding with. And this bolus was going to help with our repro program.
So that initial trial group of 100 cows, what did you learn?
I learned that I did not like cows that did not have boluses in them.
What do you mean by that?
I learned that I wanted all the information I could gather on all my cows, not just those 100 cows. I learned temperatures. I learned how to read ruminations. I learned about my vaccine program. I learned that zearalenone causes them to have heats throughout the week, not just on my timed AI program. I learned that I could start making some very major management decisions based on a very small bolus.
Wow.
That's what I learned.
So you mentioned vaccine program. What was the correlation between the data that you were able to now have access to and the vaccine program?
I think it comes down to the ability of the temperature monitoring. When you know the temperature of something, you know when it goes low, you know when it goes high. And you know when there's sites of inflammation, you know when there's an issue going on before she's going to show any sort of physical signs. Funny story was about that when we initially put the boluses in, our vet didn't trust the temperature readings because the temperature readings are a little bit higher than what you normally would expect. Like if I'd go out to my maternity area or my post-fresh group and I had a cow with 101.8 normal temperature. Okay. A normal temperature, because we're going into the reticulum, is 103 or 104. So when you first put the boluses in, they're like, whoa, this temperature is much larger or much higher than what's normal. So our vet was like, okay, we need to double check these temperatures. So after we got over the initial shock of how we read these and what the data is going to look like, because that's a big thing. Like you don't know what the data is going to look like until you're utilizing it. And that temperature data was massive. So when we talk about temperature data, we talk about vaccines. And the protocol has always been with vaccines. We know they're very important. We know it's important for not only our own herd, but for the health of our calves coming up as well. And when you vaccinate an animal, she has an immune response. That immune response is most likely going to be a temperature. And we had found that some of the vaccines we were giving together, while on paper or by known in agriculture industry, we can give those vaccines together. And physically, she looked fine. But internally, she was spiking these temperatures that I wasn't comfortable with. Because obviously, she has an immune response, which is what we want. But just how many, like she would spike a temperature and then she would get another temperature. And then sometimes she would get a third temperature. And I'm like, I don't like how this is looking. So this led to us not only revamping our Repro strategy, it also led to redoing our vaccine strategy as well. And those vaccines that feel like, oh yeah, they're fine to get together, we've separated some of those.
Okay.
We've timed things differently just to kind of give her a break.
So because you could see what that stressor was causing, and instead of, I mean, we all know that it happens, right? But now you could actually see it and you could plan around where those spikes would be and just reduce some of that overall stress.
Yeah.
So that was a huge thing.
Yes.
On that regard. And you talked about that was something that came about on the kind of a secondary benefit.
Yes.
But back to the Repro side.
It proved that zearalenone, being an estrogen mimicking mycotoxin, it proved that we had heats all over the board. It proved that we really couldn't sync these cows. So while we still maintained a synchronization program, it allowed bringing in AI companies and doing artificial insemination at different times in the day. So we worked with 2 AI companies, and we still work with 2 AI companies. One comes in the morning, one comes in the afternoon, and they really look at that insemination list that smaXtec utilizes or uses, and we have down their protocols, like breed at this time. We had been breeding like once a week on timed AI. Now we had people coming afternoon and morning, looking at the program, breeding the cows. And that led us, we started with those in the dairy industry. A lot is looked at with preg rate. They call it preg risk. I like preg rate. Just sounds nicer, I guess. So we look at preg rate. Once we had got down to a 12, and I've shared that openly with people when they ask me. So our preg rate was 12. Within 18 to 24 months, 2 years, that preg rate got to a 29. I believe it's 44% of our entire herd is bred off of smaXtec from the smaXtec monitors.
Are you satisfied with where you're at today?
Oh, we're never satisfied. Once you get to a certain, you get to a certain point, like, okay, what can we fix next? What can be that next thing, that next hurdle that puts us over? So obviously we put into a Repro, and then we really dive down deep into pre-fresh and post-fresh, that transition period. And what we found was concentrating on those first 30 days in lactation really set those cows up for a great future. When we had looked at numbers, our average lactation is 3.4 lactation. So you're making those steps. You're like, okay, we're looking at longevity. So what's next after post-fresh? Post-fresh, from there, you're looking at your pre-fresh. What can we do to make that dry cow or pre-fresh period for that cow or heifer as seamless a transition as possible? And that's when we started talking about diving even further. We would talk about vaccines. That's a big time to vaccinate a cow, making sure that colostrum is ready and that colostrum is ready for that calf. And it's also how they're adjusting to feed and how you're setting them up on a micronutrient level. We had used, a lot of people utilize a product like your DCAD diets and things like that, where it's really interesting or hard to keep track of how the cow is utilizing that in her gut, because she can be ruminating fine, but you're fine tuning, like, what is that acid level in her gut? How is she sitting? We want her to eat as much as possible while she's in this stage. So she's set up, for that post-fresh era. I love to swip, sorry. So that is kind of how we entered into the pH bolus conversation. We're like, we still have a product in there that really you need to fine tune. You need to keep track of pHs. That's kind of like our next fine tuning that we're looking at and going through there and making some more feed-based decisions.
That's the next level of monitoring of this in-rumen monitoring, is looking at that pH. And I want to just take a minute to dissect a few stages of this process. So we've talked about how you ended up having an interest in bringing in some new technology for monitoring rumination, monitoring temperature, and additional data points, primarily for Repro. Also found benefit in vaccination protocols and the monitoring of those pre-fresh and post-fresh cows. One thing we didn't talk about is implementation of a new technology into your herd.
I was apprehensive about the whole thing just because, again, new technology. I would be the one that would have to learn it. I would be the one that would have to be able to explain it to people. I know some farmers are like, yeah, like talk to my dad. My dad like, yeah, let's go. But I was apprehensive enough. I was asking, all my partners' opinions. I was asking like, okay, this is what it's going to cost. This is what we're going to do. They're like, if you think it's going to go, do it. So we went, we did it. We signed the contract and we got some bases up and we got, I feel initially we did like 200 cows. We had the original 100 and we did 200 on top of that. So I had 300 cows that were utilizing this technology. And then the data points started coming in. Okay. And mind you, I had like 2,000 cows I could have put this in. And so I'm learning how to read the data, and smaXtec is helping me. So we slowly scaled up, and now today I believe I looked, we had like 2,275-ish. Because once you start and you have a question about a cow, you're like, oh, I really want that cow to have a bolus in her. Why do I not have that information? So then we opened that window. And so we just went in and we went forward, and I'm like, okay, we're going to put it all. We're going to do them all.
You're all in.
You're all in.
You're all in.
You're all in. And that's a big stop because that's a lot of muscle. It's a lot of muscle work to get the boluses in. I mean, but once they're in, they're in.
They're in.
And that's it.
And when do they go in?
So right now, at that time, we were just putting them in as, the cows would lock up. We would put them in. Though now that we have been implementing the pH boluses, what you're doing is we're going back and we're finding some cows that are in specific dry cow groups, and we're actually giving them another bolus through the app.
Through the app. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have a desktop monitoring here, and then you also have the app, and you don't have to physically be here, which is important because you, Amber, You've been tapped on the shoulder to serve in some capacities that take you away from the farm.
Yes, I do. I do. And I enjoy that because I think I am on some leadership roles with Country Visions Co-op. Land O'Lakes has done some training, dairy leader training, and egg policy training. So I'm going to DC, done some policy things there. Cooperative leadership is very important to myself as well. And I think those opportunities off the farm, I bring something back to the farm, making sure my employees have opportunities for just learning and growing as a person, creating that culture. So if you're creating a culture of growth and learning, this was one tool that I could do that as well and bring that back. You know, it's much easier to work somewhere when you are part of the solution. You know, a person that's part of the solution wants to come to work. You know, it's a positive thing. One thing that, you know, I talk about as well is the fact that a lot of times a cow that's flagged is having some issues. Physically, when you go and look at her and find her in the barn, she looks perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong. You see nothing wrong. She sounds healthy. She looks healthy. But internally, we know something's wrong. We know she has a high temperature. We know there's some sort of inflammation. There's some sort of reaction going on. There's some sort of rumination that's not right. And so everyone knowing that we have a look inside using their app leads to making some on-time decisions for healthier cows. One gentleman actually brought up the word that I do a lot of forecasting. And that is, that really stuck with me, was I'm forecasting things that could potentially be going on with this cow and how can I improve her life right now to make sure that there's a positive outcome.
Let's zoom out for a moment and look at the whole herd. Because as you look at the data across the whole herd and translate that into results, what have been the most significant improvements that stand out in your mind? We talked a little bit about preg rate earlier, but what results really mean something to you that have stood out since implementing this technology and having a few years under your belt with it?
Obviously, we talked about the preg rate increase. That was 140% change. That's tremendous. When we talk about older cows, you know, we went from like a 2.9 average, you know, lactation to a 3.4. Just milk wise, our peak milk went from a 104 to a 116. So 116 pounds at peak milk. You look at costs in general, and it was striking. When I sat down and did the numbers, our cost has gone down. I believe they're around $35 per cow in terms of veterinary meds or veterinary services and breeding. Because you're, again, being a proactive stance, really caring for that cow on a proactive versus a reactive level. So you're providing her more, you know, therapies on the forefront.
And, you know, you mentioned, Amber, that among the results and improvements over the last couple of years are just that increase in the lactations per cow, the length of time in the herd, getting to peak milk faster. How do you tie that back to this technological tool that you have in your hands? What's the correlation there that you believe has helped you to achieve those goals as a herd?
I think it's just having real-time data at the tip of your fingers. The thing with data is you don't know how you can use data until you use it. And so once you got one figured out, it's time for the next.
So that's your next level of taking this data and really making it work for you and this dairy. And so Amber, when you really look at your goals here, what do you look at for the next couple of years?
Goals in and of itself is, you know, any dairy farm, because it's great that we have this great potential and we have this great focus. Unfortunately, we rely on what the market says we're going to get paid. So one thing that I think we're really going to be pushing for in the future is how, again, we can be as efficient as possible, but tying in some sustainability. What can we do in our parlor to make things even easier transition for these cows? What can we, again, because we're always going to find that next thing. What is going to happen market-wise, but how can we prepare ourselves to be our ability to work within that market? But I think it's fine, again, fine-tuning. We're working on that fine-tuning, and I think that's going to continue. I don't think we're going to get away from that. I still have big goals for my Repro program. There's always something to achieve there. Tapping into that beef on dairy. Obviously, we do partake. Our cows, I think we're like 35% of our cows are bred to beef. Also, genetics. Are we going to do something different with genetics? Obviously, we know that we can get cows bred using the system. What role do we start implementing some more genetic choices or different genetic choices? And I think it's just obviously, it's profitability. I mean, we're not here unless we have some sort of profitability or sustainability for the future generation. That's our big goals in the future too, is how can we make life better for those that work here on the farm? Yeah. Oh my gosh. I don't have a strategic goal in place. I guess it's always continuous improvement.
Yeah.
But,
And, when you think about just the improvements that have been made in the last couple of years, especially with technology, like you've made the big leaps.
Yeah.
Where do you see the role of the technology that you've already been vested in playing and getting you where you want to be?
Well, there's always something new and exciting that they're finding in the algorithms. And I'm sure between the algorithms and the data that we have and utilizing some AI in the background, I think we're going to be finding out some more interesting data points. But they're allowing us to really dive deep into the biology of the cow. They're giving us the opportunity to get alerts to make sure that the health of that cow is utmost in our minds. It's giving us the opportunity to intervene faster and be a more proactive approach as opposed to a reactive approach. I would rather treat that animal for a subclinical milk fever rather than a down cow. You never know, and that's, again, one of the great things about smaXtec and being a technology company is these things have all come about. Like every year there's another true health advice, or there's another alert that they can put into their system, because they're always working in the background to see what their data is telling us and then helping interpret that data and telling us, again, what's going on in that cow's life story. That is something smaXtec has been known for, is coming up with the next way to make that cow's life even healthier.
You just heard from Amber Horn-Leiterman of Hornstead Dairy, a leader using data, teamwork, and trust to drive results. I'm Peggy Coffeen, and thanks for listening to this Uplevel Dairy Podcast. Don't forget to follow, rate, and share. And as always, keep on growing, keep on learning, and up-leveling your dairy. This episode is brought to you by smaXtec. smaXtec is a health management system for dairy cows. The unique Bolus Technology measures internal body temperature, water intake and drinking cycles, and rumination and activity. For more on smaXtec, check out the links in our show notes. Are you interested to find out more about smaXtec? Well, if you're headed to World Dairy Expo, make sure to look them up and stop by the booth at the show. Attend their virtual farm tour or their Knowledge Nook session.